I never could have imagined that the night my daughter became a millionaire would be the night she ruthlessly erased me from her life. It began not with a discussion, but with a declaration, delivered under the cold, sterile glare of new security lights that turned the rain into silver needles. The mansion, a sprawling new construction in Naperville, Illinois, felt less like a home and more like a fortress she had built against a life I had given her. It was a place of polished marble and cold air, a world away from the scuffed linoleum of our little apartment in Berwyn, a world where I, apparently, no longer belonged. The rain hammered my shoulders, soaking through my old cardigan, the one with the slightly worn right elbow from years of leaning over her homework at the kitchen table. Each drop was a cold, hard reminder of the closing door behind me. I hadn't even made it past the foyer. The scent of fresh paint and expensive lilies still clung to the air, a perfume of betrayal. She stood on the gleaming porch, a figure framed by light and newfound wealth, and pointed a perfectly manicured finger toward the curb. "Get out," she said, her voice stripped of any warmth it once held. It was the voice of a stranger. Behind her, her new partner, Chad, crossed his arms. He had the smug, satisfied smirk of a man who had won a prize he never paid for. "You heard her," he said, his voice dripping with condescension. My suitcase, the one we'd bought together at a garage sale years ago, lay split open on the concrete driveway. My few carefully folded shirts and worn socks spilled out like scraps no one wanted, soaking in the spreading puddle. My daughter Jessica pulled the silk robe she was wearing tighter around herself. "I mean it," she repeated, her voice sharper now. "You step 1 foot past this walkway, and I'm calling the police. You won't see a single cent of this money, Mom. Not one." The word Mom was the cruelest cut of all. It was a word that once meant safety, warmth, and sacrifice. Now, it was a weapon she used to twist the knife. I said nothing. I didn't beg. Years of hardship had taught me that dignity is often the only thing you have left to keep. I bent down slowly, my knee protesting with a familiar ache, and began to gather my soaked belongings. A small wooden picture frame lay face down in the water. I picked it up. It was a photo of Jessica at 7, a gap-toothed grin swallowing the sun, her small hand held firmly in mine, a relic from a time when my love was enough. "Don't," she snapped, as if the memory itself was a trespass. Then, softer, "Just go." That was when I saw it, the new edge in her voice, the kind money gives to people who mistake cruelty for strength. She had rehearsed this. This wasn't an argument. It was a performance. As I pushed the broken suitcase toward my old sedan, I allowed my gaze to drift past the perfectly manicured lawn, past the gaudy realtor's ribbon still tied to the mailbox. Across the street, the houses were dark, respectable fortresses of their own. But in one, on the second floor of the quiet brick colonial directly opposite, a light flickered on. I saw a silhouette, a figure standing motionless by the window, half hidden by the curtains. It was just a glimpse, a fleeting impression of a silent observer. The light stayed on for a moment, a single watchful eye in the sleeping suburb, before it clicked off, plunging the window back into darkness. I didn't know who it was, but I knew I wasn't alone. Someone had seen. Someone was watching. The drive back to my apartment in Berwyn was a journey through time. Each mile I put between myself and the cold fortress in Naperville felt like peeling back a layer of a life that was no longer mine. The sleek, manicured lawns gave way to the familiar, stubborn bungalows of my neighborhood, their porch lights casting a warm, forgiving glow. This was a world built on overtime shifts and careful budgets, not lucky breaks. My apartment, when I finally unlocked the door, greeted me with the honest scent of old books and lemon-scented cleaner. It was small. The paint was peeling near the kitchen sink, and the radiator hissed a welcome. It was not a mansion, but it was mine. I sank into my worn armchair, the one with the permanent impression of my body, and let the memories flood in. I remembered the years of working double shifts at the diner, my hands raw from soap and hot water, just so Jessica could have the newest sneakers. I remembered co-signing the lease on her first apartment, the manager's condescending smile as he pointed to the line where my good credit would vouch for her shaky history. I remembered the countless times I'd floated her for groceries, for a car repair, for an electric bill she'd forgotten. Each time, she'd kissed my cheek and said, "You're my rock, Mom." I had been her rock, her safety net, her foundation. I just never imagined she would be the one to cause the earthquake. The memories always led back to one place, the Speedway gas station on Ogden Avenue. It became our strange little ritual, a weekly pilgrimage born from hard days. After a week of spaghetti twice, and the smell of bleach living in my hands, we'd drift there. The counter was always sticky in the same spot, and the fluorescent lights hummed a tired, steady tune. It was the one place we allowed ourselves to dream irresponsibly. Jessica would meticulously pick her numbers, birthdays, old street addresses, the license plate of the car in front of us. I always opted for a quick pick. "Let the computer have a little fun," I'd say. She would roll her eyes, but she'd hold the small slip of paper up to the light as if it were a sacred text. And every single time, without fail, she would make the same promise, a promise that had worn a deep, familiar groove in my heart. "If I win, Mom," she'd say, her voice full of the easy conviction of youth, "you get half. No arguments. We'll split it right here before the coffee goes cold. I've got you." I let myself believe her. Perhaps more than wanting her to believe in herself, I had wanted, desperately, to believe in her. The change was subtle at first. She started texting while we were in line, her promises becoming more performative. She'd take the slips and tuck them into her pocket with a new casualness, as if all paper naturally belonged to her. It was around that time that Bill, the kind, older cashier who had seen us through 100 Mondays, gave me a piece of advice. "You know, Eleanor," he'd said, leaning over the counter, "people lose luck more often than they find it. Sign it right away. It's just cleaner later." I took his advice to heart. It wasn't that I suspected my own daughter, not then. It was just common sense, a habit born from a life of reading the fine print. As soon as we got to the car, I would take out my pen, the cheap blue ballpoint I always kept in my purse, and sign my full name, Eleanor Collins, on the back of each slip. My hand paused just a second over the paper that last time, and the pen left a tiny dark dot of ink just before the E. A small, insignificant detail. A breadcrumb left by a life of caution. A habit that, I now realized, might just be the one thing that could save me. The bell above the door of the Speedway station on Ogden Avenue chimed with a polite optimism that didn't match the gray morning. The place looked different in the daylight, less like a late-night haven for dreams and more like what it was, a fluorescent sanctuary for the unglamorous parts of living. The air smelled of day-old coffee and the faint, sweet scent of gasoline. My heart hammered against my ribs, but I kept my steps even as I approached the counter. Bill was there, his familiar, kind face breaking into a warm smile when he saw me. "Eleanor, it's been a minute. We were starting to think you'd found a new place to get your lottery tickets." His gentle ribbing, once a source of comfort, now felt like a shard of glass. "Not exactly, Bill," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "I actually need some help. Something serious." His smile faded, replaced by concern. He leaned forward. "What's wrong?" Just then, a woman with sharp, intelligent eyes and a manager's name tag that read Brenda stepped out from the back room. She recognized me instantly. "Mrs. Collins, is everything all right?" I took a deep breath and laid the truth on the counter between us, as plainly and simply as I could. I told them about my daughter, the winning ticket, and the night in the rain. I didn't embellish or cry. I just stated the facts. I told them about my habit of signing the slips, a habit Bill himself had encouraged. "I know it's a long shot," I finished, "but I was wondering if your security cameras might have caught anything from that day. I have the exact date and time on my receipt." Brenda and Bill exchanged a look. It was a look I recognized, the silent conversation of decent people deciding whether to step into a mess that wasn't theirs. Brenda's jaw tightened. "Company policy is pretty strict about footage, Eleanor," she said slowly. "But—" She looked at my face, at the exhaustion I couldn't hide, and her expression softened. "But policy doesn't always account for doing the right thing. Let's go take a look." The back office was small and cluttered, smelling faintly of burnt popcorn. A single monitor showed a grid of grainy black and white images of the store. Brenda sat down, her fingers moving expertly across the keyboard. "What's the date and time?" she asked. I handed her the crumpled receipt from my purse. The 17th of March, 10:36 the morning. She whistled softly. You and your precision. She clicked a few boxes, and the screen flickered as she navigated back in time. We watched the minutes tick by and fast-forward customers, coming and going, a blur of ordinary life. Then she slowed it down. 10:35, 10:36, and there I was, a version of me from a lifetime ago, my coat unbuttoned, my hair trying to be useful. I watched myself slide a bill across the counter. I watched Bill hand me the 2 slips of paper. Then I saw myself reach into my purse, pull out my pen, and lean over the counter. The angle wasn't perfect, but the act was unmistakable. My hand moved, making the familiar shape of my name. There, I whispered, my voice thick. Brenda paused the frame. She didn't look at me. She just stared at the screen, at the small, irrefutable truth captured in cheap pixels. That's you, all right, she said, her voice firm. Signing it just like you said. She breathed out, a sound halfway between a sigh and a small prayer. Do you mind? I asked, my own voice trembling slightly as I pulled out my phone. If I record this? Brenda hesitated for only a second, the beat of a conscience checking its policy. And then she nodded. Go ahead, she said, stepping aside. If anyone asks, you've got a warrant from God. My neighbor Susan had given me the name. She's not fancy, Susan had said, pressing a business card into my hand. But she's sharp, and she likes moms with evidence. The name on the card was Sarah Monroe, ESQ. Her office was in a respectable brick building that used to be a bank, the kind of place that valued substance over style. Sarah Monroe was exactly as Susan had described. She was a woman in her 40s with hair pulled back so tightly it seemed to have its own agenda. Her office smelled of old paper and freshly brewed coffee. There were no flashy decorations, only 2 framed prints on the wall. One read, Facts are stubborn things. The other, Map, not manifesto. She didn't offer condolences or platitudes. She offered me a legal pad and a pen. 10 sentences, she said, her voice crisp. Not 11. What happened? I laid my evidence on her desk, the receipt, the printout of the transaction log, and my phone with the video cued. She watched the 10-second clip in silence, her expression unreadable. She replayed it once, then a second time, her eyes focused on the movement of my hand, the angle of the pen. When it finished, she didn't look at me. She looked at the print on her wall. Map, not manifesto, she repeated softly. Then she turned to me, a small, decisive nod. Okay, we have a map. Here's what we're not going to do, Sarah began, drawing a sharp line down the middle of her legal pad. We're not going to call your daughter. We're not going to send angry letters. We're not going to engage in drama. Drama is expensive and unpredictable. What we are going to do, she said, tapping her pen on the desk, is be beautifully, relentlessly boring. She explained the strategy. It wasn't a war of emotions. It was a campaign of documentation. We will build a case so clean, so logical, and so thoroughly supported by evidence that any other version of the story looks like a fiction. She slid a fresh piece of paper toward me. Our first step is to formally notify the Illinois Lottery Commission. We will present them with a clear, undeniable claim of ownership. Her confidence was a strange kind of comfort. It wasn't warm, but it was solid. It was the confidence of a person who trusted process more than promises. You have the video, the receipt, and the witnesses. They have a story that has to explain all of that away. She looked me straight in the eye. In these situations, the person with the quietest, most consistent story wins. So we will gather our documents, we will file them correctly, and then, she said, with the faintest hint of a smile, we will let the paper do the walking. The next few hours were a blur of focused activity. I wrote a formal declaration, my voice steady as I recounted the events of the 17th of March to a notary Sarah had called to her office. We made certified copies of everything. The still image of me signing, the transaction log Brenda had printed, the photo of the ticket on my fridge with its crucial metadata, and the notarized statements from myself, Bill, and Brenda. Each piece of paper felt like a stone being placed on a scale. Sarah assembled it all into a thick, formidable packet. She didn't staple it. She bound it with a heavy-duty clip, as if it were a legal manuscript. On the outside of the large manila envelope, she wrote the address for the Claims and Security Division of the Illinois Lottery. "We send this certified mail. Return receipt requested," she said, handing me the envelope. So there is a paper trail from the moment it leaves our hands to the moment it enters theirs. Holding that packet felt different from anything I had ever held. It wasn't just paper. It was my voice, my history, my proof, all given a weight and a language the world had to recognize. I took it to the post office myself, slid it across the counter, and watched the clerk affix the green certified mail sticker. It was the first step on a long walk, but for the first time in weeks I felt like my feet were on solid ground. The first ripple arrived not as a dramatic wave, but as a quiet, bureaucratic email. It landed in my inbox 3 days after Sarah had sent the packet, with a subject line so bland it was almost beautiful. Case ID 243-11782. I opened it with hands that did not tremble. The language inside was dry, procedural, and more powerful than any angry shouting match could ever be. It stated that, pending a full verification of the submitted materials, the Commission had placed an administrative hold on the disbursement of funds related to the winning ticket. An administrative hold. The phrase itself was a masterpiece of understated authority. It wasn't an accusation. It was a pause button. A quiet, firm hand placed on the frantic machinery of Jessica's new life, telling it to wait. I forwarded the email to Sarah, who replied with a single validating word. Excellent. I felt a strange sense of calm settle over me. It wasn't the heat of victory, but the cool, steady relief of a foundation holding firm. The paper was walking, just as Sarah had promised, and its steps were beginning to make a sound. The sound became much louder the following afternoon. My phone buzzed with a call from Susan. "Eleanor," she said, her voice a giddy whisper. "You are not going to believe what I'm seeing on the Naperville Neighbors Facebook group." She sent me a screenshot. It was a blurry photo, taken from across the street, of a tow truck backed up the gleaming driveway of Jessica's mansion. Hooked to its winch was the sleek, white convertible Jessica had posted a picture of just last week with the caption, "New Beginnings." The comments below the photo were a symphony of suburban speculation. "Did someone get repossessed?" one person wrote. "I heard the financing on that house was shaky," another added. It was happening. The beautiful, fragile illusion my daughter had built was beginning to crack under the weight of a simple, administrative hold. The car, the ultimate symbol of her unearned wealth, was being unceremoniously dragged away for all her new wealthy friends to see. I felt a pang, not of pity, but of a profound and somber sense of consequence. This was the math of a life lived too fast, a bill coming due. The whispers grew louder. The hold on the funds meant the earnest money for the mansion was now in question. The closing, scheduled for the end of the month, was indefinitely postponed. Susan called again, this time to report that the for sale sign, which had been updated to under contract, was now back to its original state. The deal was collapsing. Then came the second screenshot from Susan, this one from a private PTA group chat. A mother had posted, "Just a heads up, that the very generous pledge to resurface the playground has been delayed." Another parent chimed in, "These new money types always promise big and then disappear." The conversation was a brutal, efficient dissection of Jessica's crumbling social standing. She had tried to buy her way into a community, but the moment the money stopped flowing, the community began to disown her. I saved the screenshot and placed it in a digital folder Sarah had advised me to create, labeled simply, "Consequences." The paper was no longer just walking. It was clearing a path, and the debris was all the lies Jessica had told herself and the world. The financial consequences were loud and public, but there was another, quieter pressure building, one I only heard about through Susan's updates. Jessica, in a desperate attempt to maintain her new status, had insisted on hosting a small gathering for the neighbors. It was, Susan said, a transparent effort to prove that everything was fine. It wasn't. Mr. Henderson, the quiet observer from the night I was thrown out, was there. He didn't approach Jessica. He didn't make a scene. He simply existed in her line of sight, a calm, constant reminder of what he had witnessed. Susan told me that Jessica became visibly flustered every time she saw him, her practiced smile faltering. He would just meet her gaze from across the lawn, a silent, unimpeachable witness. He didn't have to say a word. His presence alone was a form of social accountability, a quiet judgment that money couldn't buy off. She was discovering that a reputation, once broken, couldn't be fixed with expensive appetizers. As her carefully constructed world began to fray, the attacks became more direct. My phone, which had been blessedly quiet, started buzzing with the frantic energy of a cornered animal. The messages came in a torrent, first from Chad, then from Jessica. Chad's were laced with a kind of slick, veiled threat. "Martha," one began, using my first name as if we were equals, "there's no reason for this to get messy. People will think you're unwell. We'd hate to see that." It was an offer wrapped in an insult, a promise of help that was really a command to be silent. Jessica's messages were a chaotic blend of blame and self-pity. "You are ruining my life," one read, followed by a string of angry emojis. Another arrived minutes later, pleading, "We can still fix this, Mom. I'll take care of you. Just delete whatever you sent." Each message was a snapshot of her spiraling desperation. I didn't reply. I simply did as Sarah had instructed. Screenshot, document, and forward. Each message was another stone I placed calmly on my side of the scale. I was building a wall of their own words, and it was becoming impenetrable. The inevitable phone call came late one evening. Jessica's number flashed on the screen, and I let it ring twice before answering, my hands steady. "What do you want?" I asked, my voice even. There was no pleading this time, only raw, unfiltered rage. "I want you to stop!" she screamed into the phone. "This is my life, my money. I manifested this. You had nothing to do with it." Her words were a frantic attempt to rewrite a history I had the receipts for. "You are trying to steal from me, and I will not let you," she continued, her voice rising. "I don't care what papers you have, or what stories you're telling. I will never, ever lose to you." The phrase hung in the air between us, ugly and absolute. It was the declaration of a person who had confused winning with having, and strength with shouting. In that moment, any lingering flicker of hope I had for a simple misunderstanding was extinguished. This wasn't a mistake. It was a choice she was making, over and over again. "Jessica," I said, my voice quiet but firm, cutting through her tirade, "please direct all future communication to my counsel." And then, before she could scream again, I ended the call. The silence that followed was not empty. It was filled with the weight of a final, necessary boundary being drawn. The knock came on a Tuesday evening, just as the sky was turning the color of a fading bruise. It wasn't the frantic pounding of an angry person, nor the polite tap of a neighbor. It was 3 hesitant knocks, the sound of someone who had run out of roads and found themselves at a door they never intended to visit again. I knew who it was before I looked through the peephole. Jessica stood in the hallway of my modest building, looking small and out of place. The designer handbag she clutched seemed like a prop from another life. Her hair was pulled back in a severe ponytail, and the practiced confidence she wore like armor had been replaced by a raw, brittle exhaustion. She was no longer the queen of a fabricated empire. She was just a woman standing in a hallway that smelled of her own consequences. I opened the door and simply waited. I didn't invite her in, but I didn't block the doorway either. I let the choice be hers. She looked past me, into my small, clean apartment, at the worn armchair, the tidy bookshelf, the faint scent of the soup I had just made for dinner. Her eyes, for a moment, registered the quiet, unwavering reality of the life she had discarded. It was a world that had continued, humbly and steadily, without her. "Mom," she said, her voice barely a whisper. It was the first time she had said the word without it being a weapon or a demand. It was just a name. She took a hesitant step inside, and I closed the door behind her, the soft click of the latch sounding like a final, quiet verdict. We stood in the small living room, the space between us charged with years of unspoken truths. She didn't try to feign anger or superiority. That was all gone. "They changed the locks," she said, her voice flat. "The rental company. Chad is gone. The money is frozen. Everything is frozen. I know, I said. It wasn't an accusation. It was a statement of fact. Her composure finally broke. Tears she had clearly been holding back for days began to stream down her face. I messed up, she sobbed, the words ragged. I know I messed up. I was stupid, and I was cruel, and I listened to all the wrong people. She looked at me, her eyes pleading. But I need my mom. Please, can we just fix this? I didn't move to comfort her. The time for easy comfort was over. There is nothing to fix, Jessica, I said, my voice calm but unyielding. This isn't a broken toy. This is a series of choices you made. The money was never yours to begin with. The ticket had my name on it. I'll sign whatever you want, she cried. I'll make a statement. I'll give it all back. Just help me. Help you? I repeated the word, letting it hang in the air. I have helped you your entire life. I paid your bills. I co-signed your leases. I raised your children while you chased whatever it was you were chasing. This, I said, gesturing around my small apartment, is the result of a lifetime of helping you. I took a breath. This isn't about punishing you, Jessica, and it's not about winning. It's about the truth. It's about the fact that my signature was on that paper. It's about what is right. I let the words sink in. The frantic energy seemed to drain out of her, replaced by a heavy, somber understanding. The fight was over. She hadn't lost to me. She had lost to a small, stubborn fact she couldn't erase. Jessica stood there, tears carving paths through her expensive foundation, waiting for a lifeline. She was waiting for the mother she had always known, the one who would sigh, open her arms and absorb the damage. But that woman had been left behind in the rain, on a cold Naperville night. I will help you, I said, and a flicker of the old entitled hope sparked in her eyes. I extinguished it immediately. But not in the way you're used to. The helping you knew is over. These are the new terms. I walked to the kitchen counter and picked up a notepad, the one I use for grocery lists. I needed to see the words to make them solid. 1, I began, my voice leaving no room for negotiation. I will pay the first month's rent and the security deposit on a small one-bedroom apartment, here in Berwyn, not Naperville. After that, you are on your own. You will get a job. Any job. She opened her mouth to protest, but I held up a hand. 2, my name will not be on your lease. I will not co-sign for a car. I will not be your emergency contact for credit cards. The bank of Mom is permanently closed. I looked at her, making sure she was truly listening. 3, you will write a letter to your sons, not to me. To them. In it, you will apologize for your absence and your choices, without making them feel responsible for your happiness. You will not post that letter on the internet. It is for them, and them alone. I set the pen down. And 4, you will not show up here unannounced. You will not call me after 10 o'clock at night with a crisis you have created. You will learn to solve your own problems. I let the conditions settle in the quiet room. This wasn't punishment. It was the blueprint for a different kind of survival, hers. Jessica stared at me, her expression a mixture of disbelief and dawning horror. That's it? She asked. After all this, that's all I get? That, I said calmly, is what you get. The boys, however, get something else entirely. I walked over to the small wooden box where I kept my important papers and took out a folder Sarah had helped me prepare. The money, the real money, Jessica, is not for you or me. It was never going to be about a mansion or designer handbags. It is for them. I opened the folder. Inside were the preliminary documents for 2 irrevocable trusts. I am setting up a fund for each of your sons, I explained, my voice softening for the first time. It will pay for their education from tutoring to college tuition. It will cover their health insurance and any major medical expenses. It will be managed by a trustee, Susan, from next door, and Bill from the Speedway have already agreed, and you will have no access to it, not a single cent. I watched her face as the true scope of my plan became clear to her. This was my checkmate. My fight had never been about reclaiming the money for myself. It had been about protecting it from her. It was about ensuring that the one good thing to come out of this mess, the security of my grandsons, would be absolute and untouchable. That, I finished, closing the folder with a soft finality, is my legacy. Not a mansion built on a lie, but a future for two boys who deserve better. That is my help. The final verdict arrived, not with a thunderclap, but with the quiet hum of my cheap printer. A week after Jessica's visit, an official, sealed letter came by courier from the Illinois Lottery Commission. Sarah had forwarded me a digital copy, but she knew I was the kind of person who needed to feel the weight of the paper in her hands. The language was dense and bureaucratic, but the conclusion was as clear as a freshly cleaned window. It referenced my case number. It recited the key dates and times. It noted the irrefutable evidence from the merchant's video and the conflicting inscriptions on the back of the ticket. And then, in a single, beautifully boring sentence, it stated its determination. The Commission hereby corrects the claimant of record to Miss Eleanor Collins, to whom all funds will be disbursed in accordance with state regulations. I read the sentence 3 times. I placed the letter on my kitchen table and looked at it. It was over. The paper had finished its walk. I didn't feel a surge of joy or a desire to celebrate. I felt a profound, bone-deep sense of rightness, like a crooked picture frame being set straight. I called Sarah. "It's done," I said. "I know," she replied, her voice calm and professional. "The funds will be transferred to an escrow account, and then we will proceed with the annuity and trusts as planned. You did the work, Eleanor." "We did the work," I corrected her. "Yes," she allowed, and I could hear the smile in her voice. Boring is winning. With the Commission's ruling, the administrative hold was lifted, but for Jessica, it was the final nail in the coffin. The funds, now legally mine, would never flow into her accounts. The fake empire she had built on a stolen dream collapsed with a quiet, final whimper. Susan called me a few days later, her voice a mix of awe and neighborhood gossip. The mansion in Naperville was officially back on the market. A moving truck, she said, had spent the morning removing all the staged furniture, the soulless white couches, the generic art, the bowls of fake lemons. The house was being emptied of its pretense, returned to a blank slate, waiting for a family who would build a real life within its walls. There was no more news of Chad. He had vanished the moment the money did, a ghost who had never been real in the first place. Jessica, Susan had heard, was staying on a friend's couch, the one friend who hadn't been part of her new, wealthy circle. The online stories of her glamorous life stopped abruptly. Her social media fell silent. There were no more captions about manifesting or leaving broke energy in the past. There was only the quiet, unforgiving reality of a bill that had finally come due. Her downfall wasn't a spectacle. There were no dramatic news reports, no public shaming. It was a quiet, personal erosion, a life built on sand being washed away by the slow, steady tide of truth. And in my small apartment in Berwyn, I felt nothing but a somber peace. I had not destroyed her. I had simply refused to let her destroy me. My new life began not with a grand purchase, but with a quiet meeting in a small, respectable office. I sat with Sarah, Susan, and Bill around a polished wooden table and signed the final documents establishing the trusts for my grandsons. There was a quiet dignity in the room, the feeling of something important being built to last. Bill, who had seen me at my most vulnerable, now acted as a guardian for my legacy. Susan, who had offered me comfort in the form of casseroles, now offered her steady hand as a trustee. This was my true fortune, not the numbers in an account, but the community of decent people I had gathered around me. A few days later, I walked to the boys' school with a cashier's check tucked into a plain brown envelope. I handed it to the receptionist. "This is an anonymous donation for the playground fund," I said. She looked at the check, her eyes widening slightly, and then back at me. She didn't ask any questions. She just smiled a genuine, grateful smile. "The kids will be so happy," she said. As I left, I saw a group of children laughing on the old worn-out swings, and I knew I had made the right choice. My legacy wouldn't be a name on a plaque. It would be the sound of their joy on a safe place to play. And so, this is how it ends, not with a shout, but with the quiet click of a kettle turning itself off. Not with triumph, but with stillness. It turns out that the loudest wins are not always the ones that last. The real victory is in the quiet habits that save you, in the methodical act of putting one piece of paper in front of the other until you have built a foundation strong enough to stand on. Revenge, I've learned, is not a fire that consumes your enemies. It is the patient, deliberate work of building a house for your own dignity, a house so solid and well lit that their darkness can no longer find a shadow to hide in. It's in learning that a signature is a promise to yourself, that silence can be a form of strength, and that a boundary, once drawn, is its own kind of peace. The world will always have its noise, its sudden storms and false promises. But if you hold on to what is true, if you let the paper do the walking, you will find your way back to a quiet room where you can simply be. Thank you for joining me on this journey. If this story resonated with you, please show your support by liking this video and subscribing to the channel for more content like this. I would love to read your thoughts and impressions, so please share them in the comments below. To continue listening, you can click on the playlist that is now showing on your screen. Your support allows us to keep telling stories that matter.